Early this morning, President Obama arrived in Japan, greeted by U.S. Ambassador Caroline Kennedy. This Friday, he'll become our first sitting president to visit Hiroshima, where the U.S., of course, dropped an atomic bomb that killed 140,000 people at the end of World War II, the first of two nuclear bombs the U.S. would drop on a Japanese city. The administration has been clear Obama will not apologize for America's actions, saying in an interview with Japanese media, quote, "Every leader has to make difficult decisions in wartime. I think it is also a happy story about how former adversaries come together to become one of the closest partnerships and closest allies in the world." Considering our history, maintaining a good relationship between the U.S. and Japan can be complicated, both for political leaders and people of each country. That idea is at the heart of a new documentary called Paper Lanterns, about a Japanese man, Shigeaki Mori. He was 8 years old when the bomb was dropped, and although he lost many family and friends that day, he spent decades locating the families of 12 American POWs who were also killed in that Hiroshima, that say so he could share their stories.
What a good man he is. For someone to spend his whole life dedicated to Americans who, no matter how you look at it, we did this to the Japanese people.
Basically, the city was destroyed, and somehow, which I think we all wonder, he transitioned that into helping us.
But that's just one part of the story. You may also have heard of the Hiroshima Maidens, a group of women who were seriously wounded in the bombings and brought to the U.S. in the 50s for a series of surgeries. A Philadelphia man who grew up in Japan began hosting these women to help them feel welcome in this country. That man was the father of one of my guests tonight, Kenneth Oy, who now teaches political science at MIT. We're also joined by Barry Frechette, the director of that film we just showed, Paper Lanterns. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Thanks so much. Let me spend a minute with you, and then we will talk in a second. How widely known has it been that there were 12 American POWs who were killed? I didn't know it.
Yeah, not many. You know, when I first heard about the story and the connection through my family, obviously up in Lowell with the Brissett family, but when you start hearing about it, I did the research, the first thing I do is run to Google. And even on getting on a Wikipedia page, they still had it wrong. So it's really not, and when I tell people about it, they really are shocked that there were 12 Americans there, let alone one that's right up the street here in Lowell.
And Brissett, the person you mentioned, was one of the 12. So
Brissett.
this Mr. Mori, who is otherworldly, I should say, obviously suffered some losses himself. Why did he spend virtually all of his adult life trying to get all the facts of what happened to those men there, and then spending every weekend for years trying to locate their families in the United States? Why did he do this?
You know, we went 3 times to meet with him, and it wasn't really until the 3rd time that he opened up to us, which was fascinating. He's an historian at heart, and I think for that, digging into the facts, but frankly, it was his experience just missing the fact that he was supposed to be in that area, really close to the epicenter, and he survived.
But you know what I don't get? Even though he is just an amazing character, this is a victim, a survivor, forgiving and honoring the perpetrators, essentially. I mean, these 12 men were part of the military that killed people he loved and were close to. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's hard for us to, we had a hard time just understanding it. And when he finally opened up, it was more about he felt that these 12 were alone, thousands of miles from home, scared, and they felt like, you know what, like everybody else, they suffered and died, just like everyone else in Japan. You
know, one other family, the part that will always stay with me with your film is this guy from Kentucky, who's, again, one of the surviving families, who goes there and says, I expected to be encountered by antipathy, anger, for what we did, and then all there was love and embrace. It's unbelievable. Your story with the Hiroshima Maidens is also surreal. One of them became your babysitter as a little kid outside Philly. Is that correct?
So the 25 Hiroshima Maidens were in the U.S. for plastic surgery. And like the POWs 12,000 miles away from home, they were feeling a little lonely, a little alienated, a little uncomfortable. So my dad reached out, my mom reached out, invited them over for dinner, one by one. But if you can imagine young women whose marriage prospects are gone, they're worried about their futures, and at the same time,
because they're disfigured.
They're disfigured, they're fearful of radiation damage. So they show up, and here were 2 kids ready to be babysat.
How old were you?
I was 5.
So how did you react to these women?
So if you actually look at a face covered with scars, and the keloids had not been softened by plastic surgery, unable to turn her head, because of scar tissue, unable to open her hands because of scar tissue. Initially, to tell you the truth, I was frightened, as best I can remember, and I also was strange I don't speak Japanese. But if you're a kid, it doesn't matter very long. Come on, Jim. After a while, it's a babysitter, and the warmth and the love was very much visible.
And there was a long period of time after that bond and that love between the two of you was established that you didn't see her, is that correct?
No.
And how did you see her again and where? This is the amazing part of this story.
Okay, so many, many years later, I'm in Japan with my wife and daughter. We're visiting Hiroshima. And I contact the museum and I ask, are there any special programs? And they say, yes, one of the survivors will be giving a talk on Sunday morning. And I said, who? And they said, one of the Hiroshima Maidens. And I said, which one? And they said, Michiko Yamaoka.
Oh my God.
And I said, I think Michiko was my babysitter. And they passed it on to her when we appeared. She pulled out a photograph, a black and white photograph she'd taken of me and my kid brother.
Oh my God.
But this is where life gets good. You can imagine a bunch of American tourists sitting there, ready to hear a story, and the story is heartrending. She was only 800 meters from the center of the blast. But also to have her humanized, and this humanized her. We have a reunion in front of the tourists, and it was wonderful.
What was that like for you? What was the feeling in you when you saw her again?
We didn't know her super well. This is a long time. We saw her again afterwards. She came to the U.S., and I saw her shortly before she died as the Fukushima incident was taking place.
You know, we were speaking a minute ago. I said one of the amazing things about Mr. Mori in this film is how forgiving and loving he is to people who did such horrible things. How did these women feel about Americans when they came here? I know the Americans were helping with the surgery and trying to restore some piece of their lives, but these again were the same people who took away their lives. How did
So
they
Michiko
feel?
spoke directly about this. She said that first, she believed that she had been saved in order to tell her story. And the story was one on how these weapons should not be used. It wasn't so much an anti-American story as an anti-nuclear weapon story. In terms of forgiveness, she's sitting there and receiving heartfelt apologies from ordinary Americans, day after day, week after week, every time that she tells her painful story. And she explicitly stated, of course my heart opened, of course I forgave.
Of course.
And of course, these individuals were not responsible.
I'm going to put you both in a totally irresponsible position. Feel free to.
Oh boy.
So, speaking for Mr. Mori and the other people who survived who you met there, and speaking for Michiko and the other women you met, there's been a debate about what should the president say when he goes there. He's not going to apologize. Even the Japanese prime minister said, I don't expect it to happen.
Right.
What would Mr. Mori want to hear from the President of the United States 70 years after the fact?
You know, I think it's recognizing what happened. It's not so much about an apology because I don't, these generations are so different. I think it's recognizing what happened and frankly understanding that the war did end, but I think the most important thing, at least for the people we've spoken to, is the use of that weapon can't be done again.
What would he say, what would Mr. Mori once said to him if Barack Obama happened to encounter him and shook his hand and looked in his eyes? What would we want to hear the leader of the free world say to him?
I think he would want him to say, you need to do everything you can to keep peace.
What would Michiko say if she had that? What would she want to hear from Barack Obama?
I think she would be looking forward and asking for a set of policies and initiatives to be taken that would diminish the likelihood of nuclear war. I also have to tell you, I don't think she'd be very pleased with the other candidate coming up in this race. No, because of the statements on nuclear weapons, because of the casual attitude taken
South Korea,
toward
Japan,
it.
actually,
Exactly.
and that sort of thing. You know, you both have background in what I'm about to ask. You know, you saw this from Mandela, this forgiveness.
Yes.
Is this, where do we see this except in these places, except in South Africa, and except in Hiroshima? Where have we seen this before?
We saw it in Los Angeles, California last summer. The Mitsubishi Corporation used POWs as slave labor. And something amazing happened, and I'm not quite sure how it happened, but a high executive from Mitsubishi apologized on behalf of the company for what they had done. And a 93-year-old, Jim, his first name, Murphy, his last, accepted the apology with grace and humility and compassion. And that's one way that you move beyond terrible deeds You commend the company for actually having the integrity and honesty to step forward. But you also want to note that apologies offered have to be accepted. And James Murphy is a hero in my book.
I only have a few seconds left, Barry. Did Mr. Morey see this film?
He did.
What did he think of it?
Very humbled by it. You know, to him, it's been this thing that he's really just focused on himself, and he's reached out. I don't think he, frankly, realized the impact he's had. And to your point, I really think it's these personal connections. There's a first name. There's a Jim. There's a Morey. There's a Norman and a Ralph.
Well, you tell your story beautifully in the
you,
film.
sir.
Thank you, and
Thank
you
you.
tell your story incredibly beautifly. Pleasure to meet you both,
Pleasure
gentlemen.
meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.